That night, torrents of rain fell from the sky, as if foreshadowing someone's death. At the last moment, she felt the broken wood digging into her flesh. And when she woke up, she found herself at the foot of a steep cliff next to a cart. The cart, climbing the mountains too quickly, slipped on rainwater and fell down. Leah asked the coachman to drive slower, but he was in a hurry to arrive on time. She knew for sure that she would die today, since this death was far from the first. The curse began on the wedding day when Leah learned some unusual news. It turned out that her best friend was expecting a baby, although Delia had never told anyone about her fiancé. The girl's sudden confession itself suggested the idea of intimacy with Dator. Delia will soon become a young mother and deserves to receive congratulations. Nothing is clear in this story yet, but Leah's entire body is filled with an inexplicable anxiety. Delia invites her to be a bridesmaid at the upcoming wedding. For some reason, she is sure that she knows her future husband and the father of this child very well. The truth is, this young girl's revelation could make them enemies forever. If the child's father turns out to be Dator, then the two best friends will have to share one groom. Meanwhile, the young man accepts congratulations from the arriving guests. He behaves rather modestly, assuring that he does not deserve even half of the compliments said. Many guests want to see the bride as soon as possible, but for some reason she is late. They are curious to know how exactly she managed to win over such a capricious groom. Since she was soon to become the Count's wife, the bride was probably an extraordinary girl. In Dator's eyes, she truly was the most beautiful of all, although sometimes strange things happened. For example, today the bride decided to go out into the hall without even finishing her preparations. She can't appear in front of guests like this, although she couldn't care less. She demands to be taken to Dator immediately before the groom disappears from sight again. Count Dator had never seen his bride in such a state, as if she had lost her mind. He asks not to cause a fuss, knowing that the crown prince will be here soon. As expected, she needs to be in the bride's room, otherwise it will become a source of rumors. The look of the future husband said much more than words sometimes can. It's hard to explain exactly how it happened, but at that moment Leah realized everything. Very old memories instantly came back to life in her mind, as did the feelings she was experiencing. I even remembered the dirtiest and most vile desires that I wanted to forget. Dator had already warned them that they were not allowed to touch each other before the wedding ceremony. Without even listening to his stupid remarks, Leah decides to lay all her cards on the table. She already knows that her future husband cheated on her with her best friend, who is expecting a child. It is difficult to look into the eyes of a man who all this time was an ordinary traitor. The Count is still trying to explain that he made a terrible mistake, but it's useless now. It is impossible to love again if you have once felt the bitterness of hatred. For a long time, Leah was too naive, believing every word of this scoundrel. However, she also completely trusted her friend's words, considering her a close person. It seemed that they would remain just as happy forever and walk the path of life together. It's a pity, but fate often decides otherwise and offers different endings to stories. However, in the case of her own fate, everything was much more complicated. At that moment, Leah just wanted to run without looking back, leaving the estate forever. It might seem a little ridiculous, but that's exactly how her first death happened. The impact of falling down the stairs was too strong, no one could have survived in such a situation. And yet, a second later she feels her body again, waking up in her bed. After many attempts to wake up the mistress, the maid begins to become seriously worried. It feels like the girl hears her words well, but doesn't want to talk. Anna decides to remind everyone about an important meeting that cannot be missed without a good reason. Gradually, Leah begins to come to her senses, trying to understand what happened to her. She was sure that God was on her side and always helped her in difficult times. And now, having given her a second chance, he seemed to take pity on the innocent girl. But this was only the beginning of a series of endless deaths and returns. Even when she forgave the people who betrayed her, a fire suddenly broke out in the mansion and Leah burned alive. And in the next life, when she ran away immediately after waking up, she was stabbed to death by a bandit. Again and again, time kept returning to its normal course, guaranteeing an early death. All that is destined for her is an infinite number of repeating destinies. At some point, one thought settled in my head, which soon became the main goal. Leah just wanted to live, freeing herself from suffering and senseless deaths. However, death invariably returned, as if it had been predetermined by someone. Although she continued to struggle and look for different ways, everything was completely pointless. This life, like this death, should not be too different from the previous ones. Even if she is recognized, it is unlikely that the husband will seriously worry about the loss of his bride. However, one thing in this life was indeed different, because Leah was still alive. The stranger notices that the girl is still breathing, and that quick help from a doctor can fix everything. But this gentleman is in no hurry to take her to the hospital, as if he does not want a different fate for her. He understands that Leah would never want to appear in such a pathetic state. Her limbs were probably broken and she wouldn't be able to get out of here without help. No one wants to suffer after a terrible accident, but Leah still doesn't intend to die. She has seen too much death, so she is ready to fight for the chance to live. Inside this fragile girl is the strength of a true knight. It is worthy of admiration. However, the stranger's true desire was different because he did not come here to save her. On the contrary, if the cart had not overturned, he would still have done what he had planned. The dagger thrust into the chest was meant for only one person, and that person was Leah. At the last second, seeing the killer's face, another goal is born in the heart. If morning comes, she promises to find this man at any cost. The maid hadn't seen her in such a state for a long time, as if something special had happened that morning. Previously, the lady had no difficulty waking up, but she still remains in bed. Leah begins to suspect that the accident in the forest was not an ordinary accident. Anna asks to say at least a word, otherwise she will be forced to invite the family doctor. If a girl has a nightmare, she should simply throw gloomy thoughts out of her head. In fact, what happened in my past life was a real epiphany. All past lives were like the same dreams, but today's dream was special. I want to meet again that scoundrel who thirsts for her painful death. If he exists in this life, Leah intends to do everything to ensure a repeat meeting. She wants to look into his eyes before he has time to carry out his planned murder. Each new life always begins exactly 3 months before the wedding day. That stranger with a knife appeared only recently, but it was he who ended 3 of her lives. Even if the killer fails, he does not give up and uses other methods of killing. It was previously impossible to imagine that someone would try so persistently to kill her. Only the death of this man can break the vicious circle and give her the opportunity to live. After experiencing so many deaths and resurrections, any person runs out of patience. No matter how hard she tries, Leah can't figure out who exactly hates her so much. She can't stand it anymore. She needs to take matters into her own hands. This person will definitely appear again, which means you should prepare for the next meeting. From this moment on, Leah intends to get ahead of him. This is the only way to break the terrifying loop. The next day, the maid carries out her order by inviting the family doctor to the house. Pesor was always considered an excellent physician, although his main merit was his personal devotion. Leah apologizes for such a sudden request, but the matter cannot be delayed. In response, Pesor assures that he was not far from the estate and could spare some time. The maid said that Leah had a cold, although she looked quite healthy. After a short pause, she asks the maid to leave them for a private conversation. Usually, during examinations with the family doctor, Leah always left a maid in the room. But today something changed. This inspection could have been just an excuse for a meeting. She admits that she suffers from an incurable disease that is unknown to medicine. What's worse, this disease has a very short lifespan and kills almost immediately. As the family doctor, he must himself spread rumors about the lady's serious illness. Leah asks to tell everyone that she will soon face sudden death. Pesor understands that such a false statement is a violation of the law. He has no idea whether the disease actually exists or how severe it is. However, for some reason, she asks to invent stupid rumors about a non-existent disease. It's hard to understand what she has in mind, but Leah guarantees complete safety and anonymity. She has no one else to turn to for help, and all the details of this case will be revealed later. In other words, she wants to fake her death, making it more convincing. This time, everything is really serious, and very soon Pesor himself will understand this. Leah plans to disappear from the empire completely, returning in a couple of years. She no longer wants to just sit and wait for the killer to show up on her doorstep. Luckily, Pesor agrees to go along with this adventure, quickly spreading rumors. The best friend is the first to learn the news about an incurable disease. It breaks her heart. Leah asks to calm down a little. After all, she is not dying right now. The doctor gave me about 6 months, which is quite enough to complete important matters. Unlike her, Dator is not going to put up with this. He promises to find a way to cure it. He doesn't even want to break off the engagement, assuring that the necessary means will be found. These must have been empty words to leave a good impression of himself. After everything that happened, Delia hated the head of the Violentus house even more. The poor girl is seriously ill, and the man from the Guardian's house never came to visit her. With such an attitude, he might even skip a memorial service, considering it normal. It is hardly possible to console someone who will soon have to be buried with words about a memorial service. And yet Dator agrees with this, because after the sad news, not a single message came from them. The Duke explains this by saying that after leaving the castle, the demons will invade the north again. The House of Violentius was one of the oldest houses guarding the northern borders. Besides the Violentuses, there are several other families, including her own. The Guardians are so important to the Empire that they were once considered equal to the Emperor himself. Among them, Duke Violentus, who guards the most dangerous lands, enjoys special favor. True, Dator never saw him as a hero, considering the young Duke too arrogant. However, his silence is easily explained, since news of the disease had not yet reached the north. Today, Leah did not gather everyone to discuss the Duke and his relationship with the Guardians. Since she is destined to die, she asks to be frank and tell the whole truth. Leah learned that these two had been leading a secret personal life behind her back for a long time. There is no need to look for any excuses, it always looks too stupid. After hearing the confession, Dator begins to guess how she came into possession of this information. There is only one explanation. Leah used her ability to read their memories. She tried to hide this ability all her life, but Dator has long been aware of it. Perhaps right now, this ability will become her weapon in the fight against death. The ability to read the memories of other people appeared after the very first death. With just a touch of her fingers, Leah can plunge into a sea of other people's memories. But after what she saw in her future husband's head, she wanted to wash herself off as quickly as possible. No one could understand how creepy this skill really is. Before, she tried to look only at the happy moments, not paying attention to the dirt. In these memories, Dator was a loving person who gave hope for the best. Time after time, using her ability, she returned to the bright days she had lived. In the end, Leah was simply creating an illusory world in which she had once been happy. Dator demands that this never happen again, something he has already asked many times. Besides, they hadn't touched each other for a long time, so her epiphany was nothing more than a hallucination. As expected, the Count tries to blame Leah for everything, removing all suspicions. But for Delia, an excellent opportunity arises to demonstratively take Dator for herself. She declares that the Count is indeed her lover, and that this love is completely mutual. Sooner or later, Leah would have guessed that they were leading a secret life. She considers this feeling to be the most important thing in life. Her friend is simply obliged to meet her halfway. Besides, Leah will simply die very soon, which means there is no point in interfering with someone else's happiness. The Count asks her to pull herself together before the girl says even more stupid things. To his surprise, she doesn't think such conversations are stupid at all, and Delia is right about some things. Leah herself wanted to break off her engagement with her future husband, for whom she had no feelings for a long time. There is no point in talking about love and friendship if neither existed in their lives. She doesn't care what people think, even if they start making up gossip about the discord. Leah was truly tired of this man's constant lies and decided to put an end to it. Strangely enough, having received complete freedom, the Count was in no hurry to celebrate his victory. The girl doesn't have much time left, but even before her death, she leaves him first. Delia asks to explain her behavior. She sincerely does not understand the reason for the anger. For a long time, the Count insisted that he intended to break off the engagement as soon as possible. And now, having received such an opportunity, he behaves like an offended boy. At this point, Dator finally loses his temper, revealing his true nature. He seemed to have forgotten that the mother of his future child was next to him. A second later, his mood changes dramatically, as does Delia's. On such a wonderful evening, you don't want to think too much about bad news. Meanwhile, Dr. Pesor did his job perfectly by spreading false information. Rumors had already begun to circulate in the Empire that the lady was fighting for her life every day. The imperial court and aristocrats sent gifts, doing so only for the sake of propriety. Fortunately, during this time the killer did not react to the news in any way, preferring to remain in the shadows. With Pesor's help, she calmly made plans for life after her apparent death. So the plan was going perfectly, giving some hope for a better tomorrow. Perhaps having died in people's memories, Leah will finally be able to catch her breath. Suddenly, the maid bursts into the room without warning of her visit in advance. She claims that the matter was too urgent and the lady should leave. It turned out that an unexpected guest had come to the house, although in this case only one person comes to mind. Having heard the news of his daughter's illness, he decides to go to her immediately. Count Neriel was known for his cruel nature, but in his relationship with his daughter he was different. If she had known about his imminent arrival, she would certainly have dressed more appropriately. Leah apologizes for her appearance, but her father didn't warn her about his return. For some time the Count listens to the apologies in silence, trying to understand the main point. Despite rumors of imminent death, no one expected to see this man on the doorstep. The father notices that Leah has lost a lot of weight, which is probably due to her illness. It is strange that only just before his death does the father decide to take pity on his own daughter. He had been a heartless man all his life, mistaking her ability for a curse. Since Leah's mother died, the Count stopped paying attention to his child. For some reason, his own father, living in the same house with his daughter, never dined with her, and if they accidentally bumped into each other, he would not leave the room the whole day, avoiding contact. As time went on, his attitude only got worse with each passing year. When the time came for the girl to enter the academy, the Count assigned a home tutor to her, just so that she doesn't leave the estate and resolves all matters right here. After some time, Leah learns that her father had long been preparing to leave home forever. Instead of warm parting words, he decided to say something else that should be remembered. She is obliged to remain on the estate, leaving the walls of her home as little as possible. It would be much better if the girl never showed herself. This was the last request of the father, who condemned his child to eternal seclusion. And this is the last memory of him that I just want to throw out of my memory. However, today he returns to the house again, having heard news of an incurable disease. Leah asks not to worry about anything. She will prepare the memorial service herself. After all, everyone knows that the father has not cared about his own daughter for a long time. No matter how many times Leah died, this man never tried to protect her. Until now, Count Neriel had never visited her, knowing full well about all the difficulties. But something prompted him to return right now, and it's unlikely to be due to false rumors. In all these repetitions of death and resurrection, this was the first time he had found himself so close to her. It felt like he was afraid of being cursed after coming into contact with Leah. The Count suggests seeing a new doctor, who may well make a different diagnosis. He believes Dr. Pesor was wrong to call her rare disease incurable. There is no need to give up on yourself because modern medicine sometimes works miracles. He plans to stay at the estate for some time, personally monitoring her condition. If it will ease the burden on her father's heart, Leah is willing to forget the grievances of the past. However, the main thing is different because his strange arrival is connected with the new ending. When something unusual happens in life, it is a reason to immediately run away as far as possible. The other doctor my father spoke of will certainly become the next killer. This means that we should leave the estate as soon as possible, otherwise tomorrow it will be too late. We have to do this ahead of schedule, but it's better this way than to remain a prisoner of this estate. Having warned Pesor in advance, Leah is ready to take one last look at the walls of her home. Fortunately, the doctor was not late, having carried out the young lady's last order. He was able to get the fastest horse by visiting every black market trader. The road ahead is rough, so Pesor advises holding on tight. He understands that Leah will never be able to come back if she leaves right now. She must be completely sure that there will be no difficulties with her new life. Of course, he doesn't know the details, but the girl spent her whole life here. This good man was always on her side, even when her father gave idiotic orders. However, Leah does not want to go back, even if the Count left the estate. She even feels relieved, realizing that the road to a new life awaits her. At this point, she suggests they say goodbye and perhaps they will meet again someday. Leah will also need a wonderful doctor who can be a good friend. Finally, she asks him to take care of himself, not forgetting the secret that he is obliged to keep. With these words, something new begins in her life that never happened before. In her letter, Leah asked not to blame her when her father found out about his daughter's decision. There is no longer any point for her to live in this world, and she just needs to speed up the process that has begun. A life that will soon end anyway no longer has the same value. That is why she asks him to accept her terrible choice, as a loving father should do. After reading the farewell letter to the end, Count Neriel understands something very important. All his life he despised his own daughter, considering the girl his personal curse. He realized too late how deep his delusions were. A week later, the funeral of the young countess takes place on a grand scale in the empire. As expected, the official cause of death was declared to be a common illness. Within the family, based on the last letter, the cause was considered suicide. But no one dared to announce that the only heir had left voluntarily. During the memorial reception in honor of the deceased, some people rushed to lay flowers. The guests don't even realize that the main character of the funeral is standing next to them. Pesor dissuaded her from appearing in the hall, believing that the lady would certainly be recognized by her relatives. But Leah is determined to find out what happens after her death and what people are talking about. This is a great chance to gather valuable information and clarify something about the killer. There has been no progress for a long time, and no unexpected guests have appeared in the hall. If the killer had been among the guests, she would have been able to spot him in the crowd. All the mourners not only have no clues, but they don't even really remember Leah. Walking past the crowd, she suddenly bumps into a strange gentleman. His outfit was unlike all the others, as if the man had come from far away. Perhaps the gentleman is a northerner, judging by his overly warm clothes. But news of the death had not yet reached the north, which makes his visit even more strange. This meeting immediately seemed very suspicious to Leah, and she decided to follow him. When asked to lay flowers in memory of the deceased, he immediately refused. During the conversation, Leah seemingly accidentally touches his hand using her ability. Memories can explain a lot, for example, why he came to the funeral. Gradually, she begins to delve into the memories of his recent past. In them, a young man communicates with another stranger, apparently his master. Ronan, as the night was called, had one important task to carry out. For some time, for some reason, he does not dare to tell the truth, as if he is afraid of something. However, his master demands that he not delay when the conversation concerns that young lady. Hearing her own name, Leah suddenly loses control of herself. It's strange that the reading of the memoirs was interrupted right now, when it's so important. You never expect complete strangers to start talking about you. Moreover, the conversation was about a certain task that was entrusted to the knight. At this moment, a noise is heard from the other end of the hall, as if the guests had seen a ghost. Of course, different things happen during a funeral, only if the deceased was real. But their surprise was connected with the man who wanted to say goodbye to the deceased. They say that this gentleman did not even show up at the coronation of the emperor, but he did show up at the funeral. For the sake of such an insignificant ceremony, for some reason he decided to leave the castle unattended. It remains to be seen why he has traveled such a long way and what his goal is. It was Laces who was in that very memory of the night seen a minute ago. Perhaps this is his way of checking whether the countess is really dead. Duke Laces apologizes for his appearance, but it was not human blood. He was simply in such a hurry to get to the funeral ceremony that he forgot to change his clothes. Everyone who has met this gentleman at least once in their life said one thing: Laces makes you shudder, because when you look into his eyes, you look into the eyes of death itself. And today, on the day of her funeral, Leah experienced this feeling for the first time. Their eyes met for only a second, but that was enough. It feels like he can kill a person with just one look, without even touching them with a finger. An instinctive horror runs through his fingertips as he doesn't look away. This is probably how a victim feels when he falls into the clutches of a predator. The feeling of anxiety instantly intensifies as soon as the Duke takes a step forward. At such moments you want to run without looking back, just to avoid direct contact. However, in a confined space this is impossible, and besides, Leah will immediately attract attention. I had a similar feeling the last time she died. Luckily, Pesor was still nearby and noticed her anxiety. He persistently asked her not to come, but the lady again did things her way. He suggests going outside and talking before their relatives notice them both. Leah is almost certain that Duke Laces Violentus recognized her during the ceremony. He doesn't even really know her face, and yet this gentleman's gaze was too direct. Perhaps he had been watching her even back when Leah was trying to fake her death. If Laces decided to attend the funeral in person, it means he has reason to doubt. It's strange that he even knows about it, as if the Duke is truly interested in her. If Leah had had time to read the knight's memories, this might not have happened. However, right now, she sees again the gentleman, a meeting with whom does not bode well. Duke Laces doesn't like it when a meeting is cut short at the most important moment. Realizing that this could end badly, Pesor decides to divert all attention to himself. Laces knows him as an excellent doctor who has helped him with advice on many occasions. And yet it is strange that right before the harvest season, he decides to leave the north. Without a doubt, Leah sees him for the first time, but there is something familiar about the Duke. This familiar feeling arose immediately, as soon as I looked into his eyes. It's as if Laces knows perfectly well who she really is, but stubbornly hides it from others. Whatever the case, hiding behind the family doctor's back wasn't the best idea. Since she's here, it's worth trying to talk to the Duke and clear up some issues. Leah wants to understand who this man is and why he talked about her with his subordinate. Only by making sure that the Duke was not the killer would she avert suspicion. Leah offers her services as a servant if the Laces estate needs workers. She promises to try her best. All that is needed is to give her shelter and pay her a modest salary. The girl pretends to be an ordinary simpleton ready for any job. However, if you look closely, she doesn't really look like a peasant's daughter. For a servant, she has two delicate facial features which is simply impossible not to notice. When the most dangerous man in the empire is looking right at you, it gets a little creepy. And yet Laces decides to give her a chance, since they accidentally met in this place. But it is worth keeping in mind that the north is harsh and inhospitable, no matter what the time of year. Leah is quite prepared for difficulties, assuring that she has long been accustomed to new challenges in life. She doesn't care where exactly she has to work, as long as she gets paid on time. Having heard such a bold statement, the Duke suggests moving from words to deeds. He will wait for a new servant at his estate, if she is not afraid of the harsh climate. This is a place where even in early spring the frost does not melt, and sometimes it snows. There are many different rumors about the closed north, but almost no one knows the truth. The Duke of Laces' estate is located on the border of the empire and never receives visitors. The Duke himself rarely communicates with the outside world, preferring his familiar surroundings. However, it is in the north that one can obtain all the information about this gentleman. If he really is the killer, Leah intends to get rid of him herself. The journey was not short, but after a few days she reached the walls of the estate. It should be noted that Laces was not lying when he warned about the harsh conditions. This concerns not only the weather, but also the living conditions in which the maids live. Leah immediately notices the many beds located in one room. The housekeeper explains that the maids live together because this is a dormitory. It's a little strange that this surprises her, even though Leah still pretends to be a servant. The woman asks not to distract her with stupid questions. They still have a lot to do. All this time, the Duke continues to follow her. He is not completely sure about the newcomer. Her actions can be explained by simple insolence, although the girl looks quite calm. No ordinary maid could have reached the estate alone. The workers had already heard about the newcomer's arrival, although for some reason she was late. At this moment, that same Leah, who had decided to move to the north, appears nearby. Misa offers to get to work right away, giving her some linen from the maid's dormitory. While they are having lunch, the new girl should do all the washing properly. No one doubted that the attitude would be exactly like this, although in their place, Leah would have behaved differently. She was assigned to the laundry, but the working conditions were no better than on the street. It takes her about half a day to do the laundry, which she has never done in her life. Leah left the estate where she had spent her entire life locked up, but even here she remained alone. Rumors begin to spread among the other maids that the housekeeper is burdening the newcomer with difficult work. They say that the Duke himself brought her to the castle, although it is difficult to understand why he did this. All the servants seem to have conspired to ignore the new maid, preferring to keep their distance. It is important to remember that she did not get a job as a maid to interact with the staff. She has very little time left. She needs to read the Duke's memory as soon as possible. Due to the use of the ability, my nose started bleeding again. However, the reason may be different. Immediately after her arrival, she was faced with too much work, which was completely unusual for Leah. She understands that after reading the Duke's memory, everything will end. She just needs to be patient. But right now, when Laces is so needed, he keeps disappearing somewhere. At this moment, Leah loses consciousness for a second, realizing that someone else is nearby. The Duke advises against diving headfirst into the icy water, otherwise he will lose his new employee. In winter, when the stream freezes, pre-collected water is used for washing clothes. As he gave advice, his velvety, low voice sounded in my head like a lullaby. At first, she wanted to push away the stranger who picked her up in his arms. But the limp body did not obey, as if it were stuffed with soft, wet cotton wool. After a short time, she hears the pleasant sound of crackling wood in the fireplace. She doesn't immediately understand where she is now, but this place doesn't look like a laundromat. From somewhere far away, a female voice can be heard calling Leah's name in a friendly manner. Her roommate began to get seriously worried because she had not come to her senses for a long time. Sally completely forgot to warn that colds are the most common illness among all newcomers. It should be remembered that the body has not yet had time to get used to the harsh conditions of the north. However, there is an excellent chance to get to know each other better, since they will live together. It's a shame, but Leah's condition has really worsened. It's hard to even smile back. She asks not to pay attention. After a while, she will feel a little better. After a short pause, Sally sincerely apologizes. She acted too stupidly. Like the others, the girl stubbornly pretended not to notice the new arrival. She was afraid of the wrath of the housekeeper, who would easily be able to find a reason for dismissal. No maid would risk going against the grain and losing her livelihood. Leah feels guilty about not being able to get used to her new life on the estate. Besides, Sally had no obligation to help her, since they barely knew each other. True, the maid thinks otherwise because caring for each other is quite natural. The new worker reminds her a lot of her younger sister who needs care. For the first time in a long time, Leah hears such words from a complete stranger. From tomorrow onwards, Sally intends to dine only with her, refusing to follow the housekeeper's lead. That same evening, Leah learns the name of the man who carried her into the house in his arms. It was Duke Laces, who happened to be nearby and managed to catch her in time. He must have been watching her, otherwise there is no explanation for her sudden appearance. Taking a closer look, she suddenly realizes that this surveillance is still ongoing. The Duke stands directly in front of the window, silently observing the new girl's behavior. He wouldn't be walking around the street without a reason at such a late hour. Their eyes had already met, which meant he would be watching Leah's reaction closely. It felt like the Duke had suspected something was wrong from the moment they first met. Leah still remembers his doubts when he didn't believe the truth of her story. However, there could not be a better moment to quickly read his memory. If she's lucky, she'll get what she wants the first time and then get rid of the Duke. Taking the scissors with her, the girl goes out to meet Laces, who was waiting outside. He had no doubt that sooner or later she would come down, noticing his presence. The Duke just wanted to know how the new maid was getting on at the estate and whether everything was going well with her work. He speaks of it so simply, as if he knew nothing about the incident at the laundry. After a few empty words, he decides to find out what brought the girl to the north. Moreover, she chose the Violentus castle, although there are many other families. If the choice was made due to personal circumstances, Laces asks to talk about it. It is difficult to tell from his face whether the Duke is smiling or experiencing some other feeling. He acts a little strange, as if he knows much more about Leah's life. Usually, a maid does not respond to her master in the same way as a new one does. Laces reminds that in this castle all the employees belong entirely to him. Oh yes, she is very familiar with that arrogant, selfish tone that is characteristic of aristocrats. It was a kind of warning that the Duke could do whatever he wanted with her. But in such situations you can't show weakness, otherwise his attacks will only become stronger. Leah admits that she is being pursued by one man, because of whom she had to flee to the north. It was the Violentus house that became the only place where she would be safe. After hearing the confession, he decides to tell a little about the local peculiarities. Leah is shaking all over, as it will take time to fully adapt to the cold. Immediately after his touch, the scissors fall out of his hands. If the Duke notices a maid wearing something like this in her nightgown, his suspicions will only increase. Hearing a strange sound somewhere nearby, he tries to understand what it was. Leah simply has to hide this at any cost before the plan fails completely. Without understanding how it happened, the girl simply grabs Duke Laces. They hardly knew each other, and besides, Leah was just an ordinary servant in the house. And yet the touch had already happened, which meant that now all the memories would be available to her. At least, that's what always happened when Leah used the ability. Unlike other people, Laka's consciousness is too closed to outside intrusion. Previously, the girl could not even shake the hand of an old friend without reading his memoirs. It's hard to believe, but for the first time in her life, she is unable to use her natural gift. The Duke is pleased with the new maid's courage, although she should be a little more modest. Realizing what he was hinting at, she quickly apologizes for her momentary weakness. She explains that there was something on Lace's face and Leah just wanted to help a little. For the first time, they touch him so casually, as it happened in distant childhood. These sensations cannot be called unpleasant, so Laces is not at all offended. On the contrary, if something else appears on her face, Leah must definitely repeat it. He is convinced that the girl simply decided to touch him in this way. However, this meeting should be rescheduled for another day, since it is time for everyone to go to bed. The Duke thanks her for the pleasant conversation and hopes to see her in the coming days. He does not advise walking down the street in just a nightgown if she does not want to catch a cold. Leah is still trying to stop him because the Duke's memories are still inaccessible. She seemed to have forgotten a little who this gentleman was and what his words meant. Laces reminds her that he gave her the order to return to the house. It was not a request at all. To make things a little easier for her, he decides to help the maid find the scissors. Next time you should be more careful, otherwise such a valuable tool will get lost in the snow. A maid shouldn't be so clumsy, throwing around her master's things. Looking at Leah one last time, the Duke repeats the first order. Without a doubt, he guessed why this modest girl needed scissors. It's unlikely she planned to do needlework while standing in the cold in just her nightgown. A few minutes later, she returns to the warm room. For the first time in her life, something happened to her that Leah herself had dreamed of since childhood. This ability became a real curse, condemning her to seclusion. But today, when she touched the young master's face, she did not read a single memory. His memories are so hidden that even the Duke does not remember his own past. There is also bad news, because without reading his memories, she will not understand his intentions. I should have walked in a little more quietly, then I wouldn't have woken up my roommate. Now I'll have to tell you where she's been all this time in the middle of the night. Selly is ready to help if her friend becomes ill again due to illness. She learned about the return of the knights, which would take place tomorrow. There will be a lot of trouble tomorrow, so Selly advises going to bed as soon as possible. There will be that same fair-haired knight whom she met at the wake. According to the memories, Laces personally gave orders to this young knight. If this is true, there will be other useful information in Ronan's memories. So Leah decides to go to him at dawn and try to start a conversation. During a simple, friendly conversation, it is easiest to find an excuse for an accidental touch. The next morning, she comes to the training ground where there were many knights. Only among them, the main thing for which the girl came to this place was missing. It's too crowded here, it's hard to find anyone like Ronan. At this moment, the knight notices a maid arriving from the laundry. He asks her to take the dirty laundry with her since she came to the site herself. The main thing is that these knights behave too impolitely towards the girl. They begin to undress right in front of her, not at all worried about the maid's reaction. It seems like everyone else has long since gotten used to this kind of behavior, and it only bothers her. Northerners have always been known for their simplicity in dealing with ladies, which was another surprise. One of them decides to go a little further by asking the new girl to state her name. She has to understand the situation because the guys just came back from hunting monsters. The main question was where to look away from these heated knights. Suddenly, she notices another knight appearing at the far end of the area. This was the same gentleman she had met at the memorial service. Ronan demands that he get dressed immediately. After all, this crosses the line of decency. The atmosphere is suddenly getting tense. Cedric is not used to following stupid orders. He advises Ronan to curb his arrogance, otherwise he will get into trouble. As a child, he used to constantly run after Cedric, dreaming of one day becoming a real knight. However, the fact that senior knights hide behind the backs of younger ones does not do them credit. It is foolish to expect honors just because you are a senior knight. With these words, Ronan finally gets on his nerves, even though they hadn't gotten along well before. Cedric decides to teach a little lesson on how to properly communicate with elders. His friend interrupts the fight in time before news of the conflict reaches the Duke. It's better to immediately stop the quarrel that has begun and simply go to different corners. Finally, he advises Ronan to think a little before interfering in other people's affairs. After all, an ordinary maid could have caused serious injuries. It seems that this man has also managed to make many enemies for himself, although he seems quite calm. Ronan apologizes for his older friends. They get away with too much. He will leave his uniform in a basket by the door, so you can pick it up a little later. Deciding that she can't let him go so easily, Leah asks him to stop for a moment. She would be very grateful if Sir Knight would agree to help with something. The guy was sure that it was about simple help, like carrying things. However, this maid spoke too quietly, as if afraid of attracting unnecessary attention. To stall for time, Leah pretends that she is embarrassed to ask the knight for such a trifle. And yet the laundry basket was really heavy, a fragile girl simply couldn't handle it. As expected, Ronan agrees to take her to the drying room behind the outbuilding. Perhaps it is impossible to think of a more appropriate moment for what was planned. Delving into his memories, Leah recognizes the male voice that belonged to the Duke. It allows the knight to enter the office when he appears after completing a task. Laces asks to tell us about the situation in the Empire's defense region. Nothing special happened, but Ronan noticed a small problem. The wood on the Northwest Bridge has long since rotted and requires urgent repair. It turned out that the Duke had already called a skilled carpenter who promised to arrive there in a couple of days. He asks to take him with him on the next expedition. He will certainly not refuse. This is already becoming commonplace, since the bridges in the north are not maintained by anyone. At the same time, the Duke asks for one more assignment, and this concerns not only service. Ronan needs to find a place where he can easily get some demeroxin. The best way to begin the investigation is with a simple conversation, visiting Tom at the nursery. The memory ends here, leaving behind too many questions. This is the first time Leah has heard of such a substance, which Laces is looking for some reason. These are not the memories that were needed, but they may clarify some things. Demeroxin is probably a rare drug, which is why Leah had never heard of it. Although the setting in which they were talking hinted at something forbidden, it is unlikely that they could be talking about a simple remedy like a cold medicine. Noticing her in the dining room, Misa asks her to finish the accumulated work as soon as possible. The maids watch her all day as she communicates with some knight, forgetting about work. They are a little surprised that out of so many knights, Leah decided to choose Ronan. At first it seemed that the new maid was a simple, quiet girl, but now the truth is revealed. She is so assertive that because of her, the knights almost started a real fight. Unable to bear the ridicule, her friend decides to remind Misa of her own behavior. Everyone remembers how last year she was rejected by a guy after confessing. And then she locked herself in the toilet and cried like a little child all night. Sally even found out that the guy was from the winery and often showed up at the castle. It's better not to pester innocent Leah if she doesn't want this whole story to become public. Apparently this made Misa come to her senses, although she continues to make threats. Sally has been working in this house for several years and knows how to approach each employee. She advises not to pay attention to such things. It's better to just eat something tasty. Strangely enough, my new friend had a very meager diet, unlike the others. For lunch, Leah took only one soup, deciding to skip the potatoes and bread. The work of a maid is very hard, so you should eat enough for future use during your break. She behaves like a noble young lady, forgetting that she is a simple servant. Luckily, there is an experienced mentor nearby who also has a day off today. Sally suggests having a good meal and then taking a walk around the city. All she has to do is say where she wants to go, because Leah has long dreamed of exploring the capital of the North. However, out of all the wonderful places, for some reason she decides to choose a strange establishment. The newcomer prefers to spend her only day off at the nursery. She explains that she simply loves animals and is glad that she is going there with her friend. The truth is that this is the place where the Duke sent Ronan to search for demeroxin. Sally knew Tom quite well. He was the local keeper of the hunting dogs. A minute later, a male voice is heard from afar, apologizing for the delay. Tom didn't expect to have visitors on such a day, so he did some minor repairs. Sally talked a lot about her new friend. You could say they knew each other in absentia. He promises to show off his training achievements once the dogs are trained. This dog was brought personally by Duke Laces, who found it in the lair of monsters. Sally asks to wait just a minute. She just needs to help Thomas with the muzzle. She will hold the leash while the guy does the most dangerous work. Every time Leah sees danger, memories of past deaths come to mind. Even now, when she sees an enraged dog, she already regrets that she came to the kennel. A second later, the leash slips from Selly's hands and the dog rushes towards the exit. It is Leah who is the living barrier located at the very exit of the nursery. As if sensing danger, the dog attacks the poor girl, knocking her down. Leah is used to facing her own death, but this case is special. Usually she died at the hands of a person, but now the cause of death can be a dog. Luckily, at that very moment another visitor arrived at the nursery. Duke Laces didn't expect that the new maid also loved wild animals. He hopes that Leah was not seriously hurt, although he has many questions for Tom. The main question is why the guy allows such incidents to happen while being around. With his build, he couldn't even handle one small dog. In fact, Tom had long wanted to say something, but he did not want to offend the Duke. The fact is that the dog is not suitable for hunting, no matter how hard he tries to tame it. She grew up in a monster den, so her instincts are too strong. In response, the Duke orders that the unnecessary animal be simply disposed of. He needs a loyal hunting dog, not such a disobedient wild animal. Laces is not used to leaving alive those dogs that do not recognize their owners. However, even if the dog is of no use, Leah asks to stop for a while. She is convinced that the problem is not with the dog itself, but with the puppy that she was protecting earlier. The dog must have left her cub in the monster's lair without the Duke noticing. In other words, if it weren't for the lost cub, she wouldn't have attacked people. It was only for this reason that the dog tried to escape to freedom by going to the den. Having noticed the bread, she even wanted to take it in her mouth to feed the hungry puppy. At that moment, Leah was pierced by the memory of how the dog had protected him with the last of its strength. All her thoughts and experiences were only about him, and everything else was simply erased. How strange that at such a moment Leah remembered the Count, although he did not show the same concern. Even when she was dying, her father never showed any interest. Unlike the Count, this creature is ready to give its own life to save the baby. If necessary, she is ready to personally help this sweet dog find a puppy. Surprisingly, instead of repeating the incident, the dog behaves calmly. Be that as it may, such madness simply cannot be watched in silence. The Duke reminds that wild animals are unpredictable and can attack at any second. Tom made it clear that the beast was untamable and therefore had to be killed. Moreover, this dog is half monster, which is clearly visible in its eyes. Despite all the arguments, Leah cannot simply watch the murder of innocents. Laces didn't bring her here just to kill the unfortunate animal. Suddenly, he changes his mind, ordering a squad to be assembled to search for the puppy. If this is not done, one crazy girl will go into the lair with bare hands. Surely, with the help of the dog, they will easily find the place where the puppy is still located. By this act, the Duke follows the lead of his own servant, promising not to do this in the future. She shouldn't go after them, she should just wait calmly for their return. Left alone, Selly demands that he give up his stupid habit of contradicting the Duke. It's good that he was understanding, but things could have ended much worse. And yet it is strange that he began to listen to the opinions of ordinary working women. It's hard to understand the reason, because this man was never too soft. After a long search, Laces suggests finishing this before sunset. To avoid getting caught in the snow, the assistant advises postponing this until tomorrow. Ronan's opinion is worth trusting, although he seems to be leaving out the main points. The young man admits that he did not expect such an unusual act from the gentleman. The Duke actually believed the maid, noticing the marks left by the pregnancy. This means that the dog definitely had cubs that could be tamed as hunting dogs. Even if the cub is dead, the dog will become more docile after seeing its body. However, one cannot help but notice how caring this new maid turned out to be. It's a pity that in the distant past, there was no person willing to defend Laces himself. On the contrary, it was he who was entrusted with protecting the Empire's borders from monsters. No one cared about the fate of the young Duke, condemning him to death. Even those closest to him insisted that the people of the Empire had given the Duke the role of defender of the North. However, it is known that the previous knight who guarded the borders died just a month later. Unlike his predecessor, the Duke did not wish for a similar fate. Entering the monster's lair with a squad of knights, he was ready to prove himself in a new way. While the others cowardly hid to the side, Laces stood alone against the giant. That day, the monsters learned for the first time who they were really about to face. Something inexplicable inspired confidence in the new defender of the North. This time there were far fewer monsters, although one must not let one's guard down in their lair. As usual, his young charge grumbles too much about following the rules. At that moment they hear the voice of the knight who has found what they came for. The dog scented her cub, leading a squad of knights to that place. The puppy was found in time, although he urgently needed an examination and a large bowl of food. Less than half a day had passed since the Duke's departure, but this was quite enough time for the search. Returning to the castle, he summons Leah as the main character of what happened. If it weren't for her request to find the puppy, the little one would still be in the monster's lair. Entering the office, the girl does not immediately notice the Duke, as if he had decided to leave. The office looks rather modest, considering the small amount of furniture. The book lying on the table immediately brought back memories of Ronan. It was this book that Duke Laces read when he gave a special order to the young knight. Leah didn't notice it at the time, but perhaps she should take a closer look. The pattern on the binding seems familiar, as if she had seen it somewhere else. To avoid arousing unnecessary suspicion, you need to have time to do everything before the master arrives. If the Duke found her reading a book, it would create an awkward situation. Bending over the book, she suddenly notices drops of water falling from somewhere above. Only now does Leah realize that the Duke had no intention of leaving the confines of his office for long. He was nearby all this time and only left for 10 minutes. Laces apologizes if he kept her waiting while he showered due to his absence. She asks not to worry about anything. She crossed the threshold of the office a minute ago. She noticed many unusual books and decided to take a closer look at several copies. You would never expect such an interest in reading from a knight, as this is more often the case with aristocrats. After the standard phrases, she asks to explain why the Duke called her so late. He could wait until tomorrow morning, calmly reporting on the successful search. Instead of a direct answer, Laces suddenly asks her to come a little closer. At such moments, it is important to remain calm and not show your inner turmoil. Nothing bad will happen anyway, because everyone knows that the maid is here. Meanwhile, the Duke constantly holds his hand as if covering a fresh wound. It turned out that while searching for the puppy, they came across monsters and engaged in a fight. In other words, a living puppy could easily cost several dead knights. The Duke asks for this wound to be healed, although usually a trained doctor would do such a thing. Laces suffered only because of her whim, so Leah is simply obliged to help. There is nothing complicated in the treatment, you just need to properly disinfect the wound. Having done this, Leah carefully applies the bandage, afraid to touch the fresh abrasion again. Judging by his reaction, it turned out pretty well, considering it was his first time. Meanwhile, the book clearly belongs to the Forbidden Imperial Edition. It contains all the information about the 4 families of guardians, which is a state secret. All forbidden books must belong to the imperial family and not lie on the keeper's desk. The question of why Laces was given such an honor remains open. While Leah was in the office, she kept her eyes glued to the same book. The Duke explains that the book is a family heirloom and is passed down from parents to children. It describes the unique abilities of representatives of the clans that protect the North. The 4 clans called upon to save the Empire from monsters each have their own abilities. It's strange, but there's almost not a single line written about Neriel's family. Laces asks to tell about Lady Neriel, in whose house Leah worked for many years. However, she is just a servant, and the junior staff are not aware of the master's secrets. Leah admits that she has never had the honor of meeting Lady Neriel. The lady was always very shy and did not communicate with people even during social seasons. Her only friend, Lady Delia, said there was something dark about the lady, and the groom claimed that it was all about the impassive expression on his face. Even though she was the only heir, the girl simply locked herself in her room. As a result, the lady lived a miserable life, betrayed by her fiancé and best friend. After telling the story, Leah barely restrains her emotions so as not to give away her identity. However, the Duke wanted to hear her own opinion, not the words of others. It is rather strange if she also considers her former mistress such a pathetic woman. He speaks of this as if he is beginning to guess Leah's true origins. However, until it is stated directly, she intends to play the role of a servant. Some deep part of her that she hadn't known about seemed to be breaking through on its own. Revelations with the Duke can go too far if the conversation is not interrupted in time. Leah didn't want to talk about such things because no one but her knows Lady Neriel. Looking at Laces, she suddenly realizes that this man understands her feelings perfectly. Only by experiencing loneliness can one truly understand a person who has lived in captivity. Meanwhile, at Count Neriel's estate, a real panic begins among the local servants. For several days now, the owner has been refusing food, risking becoming seriously ill. The butler begs the Count to respond before they make a difficult decision. If necessary, he is ready to burst into the room without permission, taking full responsibility. Finally, the owner of the estate decides to answer, remembering his only daughter. He remembered her too late, when the girl had already said goodbye to life. That is why the butler asks to open the door, because a guest has arrived at the estate. The young gentleman claims to have valuable information about Lady Neriel. Meanwhile, the Duke increasingly spends his evenings in the company of his new servant. Each time he asks for more details about what Lady Neriel was like in life. Sometimes it seems to him that instead of telling the story about Mrs. Leah, she is telling her own. She apologizes for being overly emotional, but the lady was truly very close. With such a ridiculous excuse, she further acknowledges herself as that very mistress. The Duke suggests ending conversations about the dead if the topic is too painful. She doesn't object, believing that unnecessary memories only disturb the peace of the deceased. However, they are still alive and you should think about your own life. For the first time since she'd been in the castle, Leah was so close to Laces. If she knew how to heal, it might bring some benefit from intimacy. However, the bandages are applied so poorly that they won't last even an hour. Suddenly, Leah asks to tell the truth about what happened to the puppy found in the den. It is known that they managed to find the cub that the Duke was going to tame. At this moment, a loud dog bark is heard from the other end of the room. The very same animal saved at Leah's request is right in this office. Even the Duke doesn't fully understand why he followed the lead of the new maid. However, this was precisely what became the salvation for the cub that Leah saw in the dog's memories. One can only hope that this tiny creature will be able to capture Lace's heart. It was he who brought him into his house, although it seems that the puppy likes the maid better. The Duke assured that he did this not only at Leah's request, but she was still grateful. To find him, the knights really took a big risk by entering the monster's lair. Without listening to her words, the Duke suddenly declares that he did this precisely for her sake. For the first time in his life, he saw such a pitiful face on the occasion of the death of a dog. Laces was too accustomed to the indifference of people who cared only about themselves. But after seeing the look in her eyes, he finally realized that he could lift Leah's spirits. However, if you manage to tame your pet, that will also be beneficial. Leah is almost certain that in all her past lives she wanted to live more than others. And yet the Duke does not understand how she learned about the existence of the cub. The only clue was the signs of pregnancy, but she wouldn't have had time to see them. If she has another way, Laces asks to share the secret. In response, Leah tells a fictitious story about a dog living in the distant past. In this case, the Duke can entrust her with the care of pets, because she has a lot of experience. Since they took in the dogs, it means they are destined to be in the Violentus castle. From this day on, Leah's responsibilities change dramatically, and cleaning the premises can be forgotten. Now her responsibilities include taking care of the dogs, because Tom still couldn't cope. For a while, Leah can't say a word, as if she doesn't want any changes. The job is quite simple. You just need to feed them 3 times a day and walk them outside. Having given the order, the Duke asks to leave him for a while. At some point, he himself stopped understanding who this girl really was. He conducts his investigation rather ineptly, but nothing in this story is clear at all. At first, she tried to make a simple bandage, but she couldn't even manage that. Then, for some reason, Leah asks not to talk about the lady, not wanting to disturb the deceased. In this way, she arouses more and more suspicion, although she tries to behave naturally. The bandage really didn't work, no matter how much time Leah spent on it. However, it is no longer necessary, because the wound on the Duke's body healed 10 minutes ago. He also has one ability, thanks to which he became the Keeper of the North. Someday, Leah will be able to understand why he hasn't died in the bloody massacres yet. The next day, Sally is the first to hear news that is hard to believe. The Duke actually gave Leah a new job, so she doesn't have to do the cleaning anymore. Surely the other maids will die of envy upon learning of your rapid career advancement. Instead of boring cleaning, Leah is tasked with looking after the pets while enjoying walks. True, Leah herself did not want to change jobs at all, hoping not to attract unnecessary attention. It is clear that after such changes, rumors about a connection with the Duke will spread throughout the estate. Selly is confident that there is nothing wrong with such rumors and that they will only be beneficial. Besides, the Duke is still not married, and yet this man is young and handsome. Selly's last words were completely out of place. Leah had not planned anything like this. However, they would still have time to talk about this, but now she needed to go. Before work, Selly has to go to one place, otherwise she risks being late. With these words, the girl leaves her alone, hurrying to an important meeting. Lately, she has been acting a little strange and constantly going somewhere. There must be nothing wrong with this, and Leah is just exaggerating a little. As for the Duke, he really wasn't as heartless as they say. Meanwhile, she reaches the nursery, where Tom is doing his usual work. Things calmed down a bit after the commotion that happened on the day of the dog attack. Now they are jointly responsible for hunting dogs, although Tom has always preferred something else. Today, Leah came to ask about something important that she would like to keep secret. She would be very grateful if he could tell her about Demeroxin in detail. It turns out that people are asking about this medicine so often that it seems like it has caused a real sensation. Tom heard that production has now ceased, and it will be difficult to get it even in the capital. Only now does Leah realize that the medicine was intended for pets. What's strange is that the Duke sent his closest assistant to search for him. Demeroxin is not at all a dangerous poison, as was initially thought. Even Tom is unaware of the intentions of Laces, who sent a young knight in his place. At this point, the puppy runs too far away, not giving the opportunity to finish speaking. Leah promises to come a little later. There are a couple of questions about this medicine. At least a simple walk with pets ended with the receipt of information. Leah was sure that she had stumbled upon an important clue that would lead to a solution. But it turns out she simply misunderstood the Duke's words when she read the memoirs. It's a pity that at the very moment of meeting Tom, the dog decided to change its walking location. Suddenly, voices were heard nearby, each of which was well known. The voice belonged to Selly, and it was clear that the girl was worried about something. Cedric asks to put all nonsense aside and do it right in the fresh air. He convinces the girl that two lovers should not be shy around each other. Leah decides to pretend she doesn't notice anything, otherwise an extra movement might give her away. She seemed to have forgotten that a dog would not behave quietly if people demanded it. Hearing the barking of a dog, both realize that their secret meetings have been exposed by someone. No matter how hard Leah tried, she couldn't go unnoticed. Now it won't be possible to look Selly in the eye and pretend that she doesn't know about her adventures. Meanwhile, next to her is the same knight who almost fought with Ronan. By the evening, the friends met again in the room, when Selly begged them not to tell anything. For a long time, it was unclear where the girl disappeared to during breaks. Selly assures that this young man is very kind, although he looks a little rude. If she had been on the set that day, her opinion would certainly have been different. Cedric Hilrose was never the kind of guy you'd want to have as your best friend. He was the wayward youngest son of Viscount Hilrose, head of the Merchant Guild. Leah knows for sure that his name constantly appears in scandalous stories. Selly is simply not able to understand this. She still has too little understanding of men. Leah just wanted to warn her to be more careful and think ahead. However, if she insists on her own, it is only Selly's personal choice. After all, you can't interfere in the relationship between a man and a woman. Wanting to fall asleep quickly, she suddenly hears the whisper of her young roommate. It was clear from her expression that the words spoken to Cedric had not made the girl change her mind. She wishes her friend a good night's sleep, glad at least that she will keep this a secret. The very next day, a meeting took place that was entirely expected. Cedric admits that he has heard a lot of good things from Selly about his friend. He begins to behave like a true gentleman, offering to help with work. However, after this, he suggests going somewhere together on the weekend. If she doesn't mind, Cedric will arrange a hotel room for them to stay the night. Previously, she saw him as an ordinary hooligan, but he turned out to be a real womanizer. After some time, she manages to hide around the corner, waiting for him to leave. Finally, she will be able to finish things calmly, without any unpleasant communication. The next second, it becomes clear that the knight is not the only one who wants to talk a little. The Duke heard that Leah had started chasing after Ronan, and had now turned her attention to Cedric. If she is too tired from work, he is ready to personally explain her absence to the headmaid. It is too difficult to understand from his words what Laces actually achieves with his concern. If he really meant well, he wouldn't have mentioned the rude gossip. The Duke offers his help in solving problems that have arisen at work. If the other maids offend her, it is worth telling about it. The Duke will take care of the rest. After listening to his strange statements, she admits that it is not about personal problems at all. There is one person in her life, but they are not close enough to teach him life lessons. Selly will surely hate her friend after hearing the truth about her lover. The Duke is not capable of solving such problems because it concerns other people's feelings. After thinking for a while, he suggests doing as her heart tells her. Leah only wishes the best for her friend, and someday Selly will be able to understand this. And if it doesn't work out, he promises to drive that scoundrel who's getting underfoot out of the north. The Duke speaks of such things as if he had resorted to exile more than once. What is unthinkable for other people is just a normal thing for him. As long as he is nearby, you don't have to worry about anyone daring to cross the road. That same evening, Selly goes on another secret date. You can go to bed without her most likely. The girl will appear in the dorm early in the morning. If you think about it, this maid was the first one to take care of Leah in the very beginning. She brought bread when she missed meals and helped with all the difficult tasks. Therefore, I don't want friendly feelings to turn into hatred. And yet there is no one else in this world who will reveal the truth to the young girl in time. She's outright stating that this guy is pure trash. Not expecting this, Selly asks not to speak rudely about her lover. Without hearing an answer, Leah continues to tell about all of Cedric's adventures in the capital. When she lived in another house, this man was famous for his debauchery and bad manners. Even if he behaves well now, it remains to be seen how his true nature will manifest itself. Selly refuses to believe this, considering this information to be just false rumors. No matter what anyone else says, she believes Cedric and intends to be by his side. Having said these words, the girl runs away, unable to continue a senseless argument. After that evening, the friends couldn't talk normally about anything for a long time. Selly even stopped coming to the dining room, avoiding personal meetings. No matter how hard Leah tried to speak, she simply disappeared from sight. Looking back, she realizes she had no right to make such revelations. She judged a man she barely knew, drawing conclusions only from rumors. Leah wanted her friend not to get hurt, but ended up completely ruining their friendship. After all, if Selly said he was a good man, then he must be. Perhaps despite his past, he really will be a good husband to Selly. Turning around, she suddenly sees the same maid with whom she once had a quarrel. Misa asks to stop walking the dogs. There is more important matter now. Not understanding what was going on, she decided to simply follow the maid, trying to find out everything. Contrary to her hopes, Selly returned with terrible news, and then something terrible happened. Unable to bear the separation from her beloved, the girl decided to jump from the castle tower. Luckily, she fell into a haystack and should come to her senses very soon. She should thank heaven, because if she had fallen on solid ground, she wouldn't have had a chance. The butler asks to tell who was the first to discover the maid's body. It turned out that one of the workers was simply checking the hay when she accidentally bumped into Selly. According to her, there was no one nearby, although there is one oddity in this story. As soon as dawn breaks, the butler promises to personally go and fetch the family doctor. He asks not to tell the Duke about this, preferring to report the important news himself. As usual, the maids will say a lot of nonsense, making it up as they go along. It was obvious to Leah that a person who was fine could not make such a decision. Even if Cedric had said nasty things, it wouldn't have made Selly climb the tower. By delving into her last memories, one can understand a lot. There really was a quarrel with my lover, but this happens to many couples. The same cannot be said about the event that happened immediately after the quarrel. For a second, Leah stopped, realizing that Cedric himself was to blame for falling from the tower. It was he who pushed the girl out of the window, hoping to make her death look like suicide. Not wanting to wait for the housekeeper, she decides to personally visit one scoundrel. While she sits idly by, the criminal will be able to walk free. That same morning, Laces learns the news of an accident that happened to one of the workers. The butler has already given the necessary orders, creating all the conditions for relaxation. Only now does he realize that they are talking about Leah's red-haired friend. The Duke decides to shorten the working day by sending the butler and housekeeper on vacation. He promises to personally investigate the matter and clarify all the circumstances of the case. By evening, all the knights were aware of the matter, understanding who the culprit was. Cedric himself didn't understand how it all happened, but she burst into tears like a little child. It's as if he's deliberately not telling the main thing, because the guys are interested in other details of the date. Some knights are sure that it was he who pushed Selly because of his refusal. In the middle of the conversation, a man appears in the house who knows much more. Seeing the girl, the knights' voices suddenly fell silent, waiting for an explanation from the maid. The maids never come to the knights at a late hour, knowing what might happen. Cedric is glad that she finally decided to start communicating, and besides, today he became free. He suggests coming a little closer and drinking something strong with the knights. At this point, Leah declares that she knows the whole truth about the fall from the tower. It was not a suicide attempt if he hoped to escape punishment. The scoundrel knew perfectly well that no one saw the two of them together at that terrible moment. You might think there is no evidence against Cedric. There are no witnesses either, which means he will simply continue to lead an idle life. And this sweet girl may remain crippled forever, having been forgotten by her lover. It's a shame that just one vile person can shatter a life into pieces. From her words, it becomes clear that Leah was nearby at the moment of the fall. Cedric warns that with such information she might go after her friend. He has already done this once and may well repeat a similar trick. Leah used to be his type and could have been an excellent replacement for his ex-girlfriend, but now things have gone too far to turn a blind eye to her threats. 10 minutes later, he takes Leah to the edge of the cliff, intending to get rid of the witness. The guys warn that even for such a desperate night, this is too much. Finally, he decides to reveal the truth about why he was forced to kill Selly. This girl repeated almost word for word what her dear friend told her. Before she dies, she must learn that Cedric is much worse than she imagines. With these words, he releases the captive, having committed the second crime in a row. For some reason, the knights are confident that no one will notice the disappearance of the new maid. Even if this happens, it is unlikely that anyone will suspect the Defender of the North of murder. Everything is heading towards Leah dying a meaningless death again, without ever having been able to change her fate. The thought of having to go back soon is more suffocating than ice water. When she opens her eyes, all the people will become strangers again, as if they had never known each other. She was dead tired of repeating the same stupid story over and over again. However, this time something went wrong, as someone else was able to break into this plot. The Duke did not lie when he said that he would personally monitor everything that happens in the estate. He was only a second late, although there was still time to pull Leah to shore. After a short time, the guard couldn't believe his eyes when he saw Lace's figure in the distance. He managed to prevent an ending that always seemed inevitable. All that was left was to bring her to her senses and then visit a young knight. The commander of the guards orders the gates to be opened before he does so himself. It was hard to imagine that the Duke would appear in the middle of the night, bringing a girl with him. It looks like this was no ordinary walk under the moon, and tomorrow they will hear big news. The commander demands that this be kept secret, without giving rise to gossip. It is clear that he carried in his arms the very same servant whom he had decided to place in the estate. They don't know what connected them, but they don't treat ordinary workers that way. Instead of the dormitory, Laces leaves her in his quarters until she regains consciousness. Fortunately, Leah comes to her senses quite quickly, trying to make sense of what happened. Without a doubt, it was Laces who became her savior by bringing her to his room. Because of her headache, she had trouble remembering details before the fall. All that remained was the memory of Cedric grabbing her by the hair and dragging her into the forest. And then she fell into the river, sure that she could not survive. From this point on, the memories become vague, but some things are still remembered. Even though she was almost unconscious, she felt his presence underwater. If this is exactly how it happened, then this man is saving her for the second time. The Duke is embarrassed to admit it, but it seems he is the only one who values her life. She knew perfectly well what she was getting into, but for some reason she went to meet Cedric. Such an act cannot be explained by anything other than simple madness. When he advised her to do what Leah thought best, the Duke had something else in mind. She could have died that night, and only one person prevented her death. It is unclear why Laces shows such concern, but after this act, everything will be different. For the first time in a long time, she meets a man who values her life. This rescue cannot be called simple kindness shown to strangers. The look directed in her direction was full of reproach instead of the usual male passion. The Duke begins to tell the story of how he discovered a crowd of drunken knights near the river. They were talking nonsense about patrolling, giving away some facts. From the conversation, it became clear that something irreparable had happened there, which they preferred to remain silent about. If Leah said one word, the Duke would immediately order the execution of every knight. In response, she insists that the main reason was her own carelessness. With these words, she seems to be shielding the perpetrators of the crime. If she is so stubborn, the Duke can decide everything himself without any testimony. He orders her to go to her room and start packing. It's strange, but the Duke seems to intend to drive her out of the north after what happened. She asks to stop for at least a minute and listen to her opinion. Even if the decision cannot be reversed, there is something worth staying for. Right now, a maid named Selly is sick and needs someone close to her. She is very dear to Leah, so she asks to leave her in the castle until she recovers. After hearing the request, the Duke gives exactly 1 week, after which the order will come into force. There have been too many accidents, and they cannot be allowed to happen again. If that's all, the Duke suggests ending the conversation and honoring the terms of the agreement. The girl will probably feel better in 1 week, and then Leah will be able to leave peacefully. Meeting him in the corridor, the butler asks him to give the following orders. First of all, he orders 3 knights to be placed under house arrest. It is known that among them is the son of Viscount Hilros, but this should not stop them. Having given the order, Laces moves on, leaving the butler completely bewildered. It is clear that after the arrest, his father will come to the castle and cause big problems. If Leah had told him about Cedric, the Duke could have banished the scoundrel that very day. But because of the scandal, Selly will also suffer, which is something she wanted to avoid at all costs. It turns out that Leah is obliged to punish this knight herself, taking all the blame upon herself. In her current position as a maid, this will not be easy, but she intends to act. First, we should check Selly's condition, and only then take on Cedric. Entering the dorm room, Leah tries to find her young roommate. Contrary to expectations, her bed is empty, although the girl had recently been unconscious. Perhaps she managed to come to her senses while Leah was on the castle owner's floor. But even if that were the case, it is unlikely that Selly would have dared to go for a walk at such a time. Her guess turned out to be correct. The girl really did decide to do the worst. After what happened, she could not come to terms with the fact that her life was completely destroyed. Seeing Leah, the maid silently watches her every step for a while. Leah tries to reason with her, reminding her that breaking up won't affect her reputation in any way. According to the young maid's recollections, it was here that they met Cedric. At that time, he was very friendly and behaved like a true gentleman. As a result, the relationship led to the girl standing between life and death. She demands that you don't come closer, otherwise her last step will happen right now. It feels like she's ready to do it, but something is stopping Selly. The next second, Leah notices how she begins to quickly lose her balance. Perhaps it would have all ended with a simple whim if the wind had not started to blow. Leah manages to grab her by the clothes, pulling her to his side with all her strength. Next time there will be no one around to prevent you from doing something stupid. After all, she is left with loving parents who will not come to terms with the loss. The silly girl completely lost her head, although her friend had warned her about this many times. From now on, she asks to trust her. Leah has much more experience in these matters. If a man behaves too gallantly, it does not mean that he will always be like that. Whatever the case, a breakup isn't worth losing your mind over. After listening to her friend, Selly apologizes for her idiotic behavior. She did warn him about a dangerous connection with Cedric, but her heart wanted something else. Leah promises to help with all the problems if she follows the advice. She suggests that they take revenge on this guy together for everything he managed to do. Immediately after this, Leah decides to show up at the site where Ronan usually trains. Some knights are convinced that the new servant met with Duke Laces. But after the last incident, she decided to switch all her attention to the knight. Leah didn't want everyone to recognize her face, but that's exactly what all the events led to. Ronan suggests they find another place, but she only dropped by for a few minutes. Before she leaves, she wants to ask for one favor, revealing her intentions. Leah decided to do everything to ensure that the young knight was banished from the north forever. If Ronan agrees to help, it will be much easier for them to do this together. He already knows what happened last night after the meeting with the drunken knights. It is clear that the girl wants revenge, but Leah could have appealed directly to the Duke. If you think back, there was a scene in Ronan's childhood memories where Cedric bullied him. This knight was raised in the house of Cedric's father and often saw the humiliation of his parents. That's why she decides to turn to a man who hates Cedric for help. Ronan accepts her offer. He himself has long dreamed of taking revenge on a certain scoundrel. You just have to tell him what needs to be done, and he promises to do everything in the best possible way. Leah intends to invite his father to the castle so that he can see his offspring in person. At the moment of touch, she saw something important that needed to be told to Viscount Hilrose. Until the day Cedric's father arrives at the castle, the plan must be kept a closely guarded secret. Duke Laces will definitely find out about everything, but now he is unlikely to support this idea. About a week later, he hears some noise coming from the first floor. It looks like we had an unexpected guest today, which is a rare occurrence. No one except interested parties would leave warmer climes for a trip to the north. He was right. The Viscount came here about his son and his future fate. He apologizes for the late visit, but the news of Cedric's arrest forced him to do so. Right now, meeting with my son is impossible because he was placed under house arrest. The Viscount certainly knows that his offspring is the prime suspect in the crime. As expected, the Count denies his son's guilt, citing the machinations of the family's enemies. Laces asks his assistant to take him to a room where the Viscount can await trial. For the first time in years, Ronan saw the man responsible for his parents' suffering. The Viscount always knew that his son was bullying the servants, but he turned a blind eye to it. After some time, they approached the room, but that was exactly the plan. Leah was not here by chance. She had long wanted to talk to this gentleman. She is the very same servant with whom Cedric's crime is connected. First of all, Leah suggests throwing away all prejudices and just listening to her. This incident is not at all an ordinary quarrel between a man and a woman. After all, people don't die because of a petty quarrel, but that's exactly what could have happened to Leah. In addition, the day before, Cedric attacked another maid, pushing her out of a tower window. The Viscount asks you to tell that girl that her family's debt is completely forgiven. He is trying to hush this matter up too easily, but the story is not over yet. Leah suggests looking at the cadastral plan of the abandoned site. The land is of quite high value, at least for the Viscount himself. It is there that the body of his eldest son is buried, which he is desperately searching for. Shortly before his disappearance, Cedric took a very large sum of money from his father, and then he bought the land where he wanted to hide his brother's body forever. In other words, this gentleman's youngest son killed the family's eldest heir. After hearing the accusations, the Viscount warns of the consequences in case of deception. Leah is not afraid of such threats. She just wanted to tell the truth about his own child. In aristocratic families, brothers often kill each other for power. But even if Cedric had killed the Viscount, the crime would not have been considered parricide. Leah knows that he is not the Count's biological son, nor is he Theo's biological brother. He was the illegitimate son of his mistress, who became pregnant by another man. In order to infiltrate the Viscount's family, the young woman claimed to be pregnant by the Count. Years later, Cedric easily got rid of Theo, never feeling any kindred blood in him. It was clear from the Viscount's face that he still had doubts, although his words sounded convincing. Leah suggests going right now to the estate that Cedric bought. However, there is another way to find out if he really is a killer. 10 minutes later, footsteps were heard outside Cedric's room. The maid brought food, although he repeatedly demanded to simply leave him alone. He refuses to eat this crap, wanting the usual expensive food like he always had. If they are not capable of even this, he asks that they at least inform his father of his arrest. A second later, he realizes that this time it was the same maid who had come to see him. Leah should have drowned in the river because he personally threw her off the cliff. For the first time in his life, he feels fear, as if he saw a real ghost. Cedric decides that they are simply making fun of him, playing stupid tricks. He demands to know what is happening here and how she managed to survive. Be that as it may, because of her strange rescue, he may stay here forever. But if this does not happen, Cedric promises to personally finish off the servant who stands in the way. He will drown her in the river again or throw her into the forest so that hungry animals can eat her. Instead, Leah suggests simply burying him underground, as happened with Theo. The mercenary hired by Cedric did not keep his mouth shut when he saw the dead father. The Viscount asks to stop this circus. He has already heard enough words. The maid did not lie when she spoke about her son's latest crimes, which means the rest is also true. There is no point in denying the fact that he is the heir's killer. Trying to find excuses, Cedric insists that the two are in cahoots. However, the Count learned that he was not his biological child at all. Hearing this, Cedric is unable to say a word in response for a while. Of course, he knew about it, but his mother promised to keep his origin a secret forever. The Count asks to convey to Duke Laces that he is forced to leave this place immediately. He doesn't mind if the bastard's limbs are cut off or he is banished from the north forever. Finally, the Viscount demands that he never be called his father again. As of today, Cedric is officially stripped of his title and banished from the family. All his crimes will be investigated, and Ronan will handle this personally. During his house arrest, he is prohibited from leaving his room. Ronan suggests they continue. There is still a lot of unfinished business ahead. At the last moment, Cedric tries to reason with his father, who personally condemns him to death. All his life, this scoundrel committed all sorts of atrocities, hiding behind the back of his influential father. But now, in exile, he is surrounded only by enemies seeking revenge. Meanwhile, Leah decides to accompany the gentleman, walking to the carriage with him. As she said, "You don't have to travel too far to get to know your son." The man's true nature became apparent as soon as they started talking about the crime. The Viscount is grateful to her, because with Leah's help, he learned a lot about his own destiny. Before leaving, he promised to let me know if he managed to find the body of his murdered son. Perhaps the Count will have something to think about, since in a short time he lost both heirs. The Duke would certainly have refused the Viscount's visit if he had known about the plan in advance. That's why Leah made him wait until everything became clear on its own. Laces thought that she would quietly look after him, since Leah wanted to be close. However, the maid decides to drag the knight, with whom she had been secretly wandering around the castle, into this. The Duke began keeping an eye on them from the day Leah first visited the training ground. Cedric had done dirty deeds before, but there was no reason to imprison him. But thanks to an ordinary maid, it is possible to do what has been brewing for a long time. Be that as it may, a week has already passed and Leah probably remembers their agreement. Of course, she did not want to leave the castle, but the Duke's decision was final. Leah promises to leave the northern lands at dawn. She just needs to pack her things. Suddenly, the Duke changes his mind, appointing her as his personal maid. From now on, wherever she goes, the girl is obliged to inform the master about everything. Just a week ago, Leah was sure that the Duke had decided to drive her out of the castle. Apparently, she misunderstood the meaning of those words spoken in the office. The Duke will never let her go of his own free will, and that is something that must always be remembered. She can live in the north her whole life unless she wants to escape. Fortunately, Selly soon came to her senses, throwing out her stupid thoughts. She is proud of her friend because it was Leah who invited the Viscount to the castle. An ordinary maid would not dare to do such a thing. You have to be a truly brave girl. Hearing voices, Leah decides to intervene a little in the lively conversation. Her outfit has changed because now the girl is the Duke's personal maid. Each of them dreams of wearing such a uniform, but only one has the privilege. Over time, many things began to change, and along with new clothes came a new attitude. Her room is being transformed, gradually becoming filled with expensive furniture. The salary becomes incomparably higher than that of any worker from among the servants. Fortunately, no one expressed dissatisfaction, although there were many reasons for envy. While she is here, Selly hurries to deliver a letter that came addressed to her friend. It turned out that the Viscount had successfully found the body of his son, buried in abandoned lands. Cedric was officially stripped of all titles and powers, and his lands were confiscated. They spared his life, but made sure that he would never be able to hold a sword in his hands. In his letter, the Count promised to repay the favor as soon as Leah needed his help. Thus, an unexpected ally appears who can help in the future. Having become a personal maid, Leah intends to learn as much as possible about her master. Noticing her condition, Selly suggests taking a day off, otherwise she will get sick again. It would be better to just rest in the room. The Duke certainly won't mind. A true friend will not accept refusals, even if she starts convincing her otherwise. After showing her to her room, Selly promises to take care of walking the dogs herself. Of course, she felt obligated, although Leah didn't need care. Still, a short nap wouldn't hurt, especially since there were no other things to do. Lately, she had been doing nothing at all, wandering around the castle all day. The Duke gave Leah just one task, which was to simply wait. However, after waiting a whole week, he still does not assign a single task. One thing is clear, Laces appointed her as his personal maid, not wanting to put her in danger. Perhaps he does this because he still has no idea about his true origin. In other words, he shows concern for an ordinary servant as if he sees a duchess in her. Such concern must have a reason, but at present his intentions are unknown. It would have been much easier if Leah had been able to read at least part of his memories. Then there would be no need to suffer, going through guesses and ridiculous versions. As before, the Duke himself appears in the room, noticing the intense heat. With such poor health she cannot work, while Leah claims the opposite. This girl cannot be left unattended, because she always does things her own way. He intends to keep an even closer eye on her than before. After a few days, she feels much better and almost no longer feels sleepy. Leah asks not to worry about anything if the Duke has ordered her to be taken care of again. However, the maid asks to tell the Duke about this personally because he wants to see her. It looks like he's decided to assign a task for the first time in a long time. The only strange thing is that Laces ordered me to go down to the living room and not to the study. Upon seeing Leah, the Duke wants to introduce her to an excellent family doctor. He must have decided to take her health seriously without even consulting her. The main thing is that this is not the first time she has met this young man. Pesor is no less surprised, fully understanding what this maid's costume means. The appointment of a personal maid was a great success because it brought her closer to her goal. From now on, the Duke appoints Pesor as his personal physician, who will work in the castle. He did it for Leah's sake, knowing about her long-standing friendship with this man. It is she who will have to be taken care of the most, judging by her condition. After the inspection, Laces advises taking a walk and chatting a little with an old friend. Whatever the Duke comes up with, first of all, Pesor must be taken out of the house. The Duke asks not to thank him after all, he was only fulfilling his duty. At first, Leah behaves a little strangely, as if she is afraid of something. Even when Pesor offers to help, she doesn't want to attract unnecessary attention. Recently, Leah has been working as a maid, so she is obliged to carry things. It seemed he had completely forgotten that she was no longer a mistress, but a simple servant. Come to think of it, Laces could have summoned him specifically to keep an eye on Leah. She asks to extend her hand. There are some things that need to be clarified before leaving the castle. Not understanding what she had in mind, Pesor obediently carries out his mistress's order. He forgot to take off his glove, which is exactly what is needed to use the ability. After a few seconds, everything becomes clear the young man received no instructions. He was invited solely as a doctor, without any additional orders. Leah asks him to explain why, of all places, he chose the Violentus castle. This is not about an invitation from the Duke, but about a personal choice made in favor of the North. It is known that after her departure, the young doctor received several invitations at once. For some reason, Pesor decided that since the Duke had called him to work, something had happened to Leah. Upon learning of her illness, he became even more worried, eventually accepting the invitation. This was the only way to make sure that the lady was okay. However, today, seeing her in the hall, he realized that she was doing just fine. Recently, Leah became a personal maid, quickly outstripping the rest of the staff. Now Pesor understands why the Duke takes such great care of her health. Leah suggests continuing the conversation in the room she has just brewed fresh tea. Watching them, the Duke feels a little calmer, knowing the doctor's abilities. This doctor was truly famous for his skills, although he was much younger than his colleagues. However, Leah did not value him for this at all. First of all, Pesor was a good friend. Even when everyone sided with Dator and his new bride, he remained faithful to his mistress. Leah promises not to forget the kindness and devotion he showed throughout his life. The young man decides to tell a little about his father, who has become a real recluse. After her supposed death, the Count's condition deteriorated sharply, and he almost never appeared in public. It seemed that Leah's death reminded him for the first time that he had a daughter. Meanwhile, one guest visited the house whom the Count did meet. Judging by his clothes, he was a high-ranking person and had influence. Leah asks not to say another word about her father and his noble guests. It's hard to understand how they lived all this time without really knowing each other. The main thing is that Leah was never able to gather the necessary evidence of the Duke's involvement. She used to think that he was the killer, but now she is starting to doubt it. Seeing her friend's face, she remembers that Pesor knows almost nothing about this matter. It's strange, but for some reason he decides that the lady used demaroxin. Leah asks not to talk nonsense. She didn't even give any reason to think so. Demaroxin was indeed developed as a treatment for livestock, but then it turned out that it is a deadly poison for the human body. Pesor learned about this back in the academy when he was studying various drugs. Leah was never able to find out what exact symptoms this remedy caused. It is quite difficult to detect because demaroxin is colorless and tasteless. As soon as a person takes a sip, a strong burning sensation spreads from the tip of the tongue. Then the muscles begin to spasm, leading to paralysis. In just 10 minutes, a person dies in agony, unable to even breathe. All this time, Pesor seemed to be retelling her own feelings. This is the exact pain she felt after taking just one sip of tea. It turns out that the tea contained the very same demaroxin that the Duke was looking for. It is unlikely that such a coincidence can be called a simple accident. Sally decides to enter the room at the wrong time after hearing the main secret. Just now, the doctor called Leah by another name, as if she were not a servant at all. The maid only wanted to bring treats, but ended up becoming an unnecessary witness. Pesor asks to answer directly how long the maid has been in this room. Most likely she hadn't heard about demaroxin, and the rest can be easily explained. Leah insists that they were talking about the previous owner of the estate where the doctor worked. Judging by her appearance, the girl does not completely trust her own friend's words. The problem was that Pesor called Leah his mistress again, out of habit. Now it will not be possible to deny this by citing yet another stupidity. Since she is here, Leah asks that no one tell what she heard in the room. I had to tell the whole truth about the faked death and the identity substitution. It is impossible to reveal all the details, but now Sally is aware of the most important things. The Duke doesn't know anything either. He really thinks she's just an ordinary servant. It's unclear why he made her his personal maid, but it certainly wasn't because of her status. Leah asks her not to worry about anything. It doesn't pose any threat to Sally. Suddenly, the maid also starts calling her mistress, as if she realized something. She insists that she took too many liberties with Leah. For some reason, Sally thinks she should have guessed about her noble origins. It would be better if she didn't hear anything at all and remained the same friend. However, while they live in the castle, Leah asks to be called by the same name. Otherwise, their secret will be revealed as suddenly as it happened now. Pesor is indeed the family doctor at Neriel's estate. From this day on, only 3 will know about the secret if Pesor learns to keep his mouth shut. It can be said that now Sally knows her main weakness, which is inaccessible to others. It's worth forgetting about the formal tone in communication. This will immediately attract attention. Besides, they have already been through a lot together, and she has the right to consider herself Leah's friend. It must be said that in addition to the ability to read memories, this girl has the gift of persuasion. It is too dangerous to reveal one's identity in the castle because there are ill-wishers among the servants. Once they learn of their true origins, they will certainly take advantage of this opportunity. That same night, Leah decides to go to the Duke herself for one important matter. He was a little confused to see her at the bedroom threshold at such a late hour. Leah apologizes for visiting, but she needs to ask something. Perhaps it was her communication with Pesor that pushed her to this decision. Entering the room, the Duke asks her not to doubt, even if the topic is not entirely ordinary. She is too tense, but the Duke is ready to listen to any request. She hadn't behaved this way before, preferring to speak out loud about everything. No one except Leah allowed themselves to contradict the master on the very first day. There is something suitable for this situation that will help loosen the tongue. Ice wine, which is made only in the north, will work better than any medicine. Laces usually keeps the first batch, but this time he decides to make an exception. And the fatigue of the body and the worries in the soul will melt away like the first snow. The truth is that this glass of wine only makes Leah's soul even more anxious. She had died once in the past from demaroxin, and Laces was looking for exactly this drug. Perhaps he was different at that time, although the plots of her fates are always similar. She decides to ask directly why Laces needed demaroxin. Leah learned about this only recently, but thoughts about the drug still haunt her. For a long time, the Duke could not understand why the maid began to behave so cautiously. It is now clear that she is afraid to drink the wine that is in his room. To dispel any doubts, he takes the first sip of wine from his glass. A few seconds later, the glass was empty, but Laces was perfectly fine. He didn't need demaroxin itself, but the person who was trying to get it. If Leah really thinks the Duke is a poisoner, she should change her mind. Everything is exactly the opposite. He only wanted to prevent someone else's death. Leah asks to reveal the truth about whose life is in danger. After thinking for a while, the Duke decides not to continue this dangerous conversation. Leah must not know everything, otherwise her own life will be in danger. Very soon, noisy people will arrive at the castle and she will figure everything out herself. Besides, it will require a lot of hands, so she will also have to help the maids. Having said this, the Duke orders her to go to her room. The conversation is not over yet, but for some reason he is carefully hiding the main thing. It must be said that the wine really only loosened the tongue of Laces himself. Meanwhile, Delia gradually gets used to her new role as mistress. Now Anna is obliged to serve her, because Lady Nereal is no longer there. She asks for a little patience, because the head of the family strictly forbade the bride to leave the house. Delia is confident that the rumors about Leah's suicide are completely true. At last, the only obstacle between her and her lover had disappeared. The problem is that there is still no news from Dator, as if he has disappeared. Dator still can't come to his senses, although the advisor advises him to relax. They said that everything would soon calm down, but after a few weeks the talk only became more intense. After Leah's sudden death, all the aristocrats who had promised investments refused to help. If this continues, his life's work will go down the drain. You'll have to disappear from sight for a while, taking important evidence with you. Meanwhile, everything in Leah's life is changing so quickly that she doesn't have time to get used to it. When she was locked in the estate, it was difficult to even feel the changing of the seasons. In the north, everything is much livelier and the maids behave completely differently. It's a shame that because of her comfortable life, Leah couldn't realize the simple truth. It's not about wealth, but about how a person relates to his own life. For example, among ordinary servants, there are those who are happier than any aristocrat. Such a servant is her new friend, who has become her main assistant. She asks to contact her with any questions, casting aside stupid doubts. However, from the day Selly learned the truth, she began to speak too formally. If she knows anything about the new guest, Leah asks to share the information received. It's strange, but even the experienced maid doesn't know anything, just like all the other servants. All that is known is that a large group of noisy guys will arrive. At this moment, the housekeeper demands to get ready. An important guest will arrive here soon. The maids are required to finish their work and gather in the corridor near the living room. This also applies to Leah, although everyone knows about the Duke's special attitude. Today he himself called her for help, warning her about the arrival of noble guests. The housekeeper asks not to worry. There are plenty of servants in the castle. Misa begs not to keep her in suspense. The housekeeper probably knows who exactly will be visiting. It becomes clear that the gentlemen from the guardian families will soon appear right here. They will certainly recognize the deceased heiress who suddenly returned to life. Dator and Delia will arrive first and will also need to be served. The Duke personally comes out to greet the guests, inviting them to make themselves comfortable in the castle. Dator thanks for the invitation, hoping that the short visit will leave a warm impression. In times like these, major families must come together to help each other. Luckily for Leah, the housekeeper actually did relieve her of her work. If she had been in the hall, she would have had to lay all her cards on the table in front of the Duke. Then her plan would have come to an end, and Leah would not have been able to find out the information she needed. The strange thing is that Dator hardly knows Laces, although he is having a friendly conversation. Perhaps they somehow learned of her presence and decided to come for her. Not wanting to be left out, Delia expresses her admiration for the local beauty. For the first time in her life, she sees so much snow, something that never happens in her native land. Dator asks for a little silence, since they have not yet finished their conversation with the Duke. He apologizes for his fiancée. The girl has been too emotional lately. The two decided to get married, but Dator seemed embarrassed in front of his future wife. Due to his busy schedule, the Duke will not be able to accompany the young couple. He advises to refrain from long walks, keeping in mind the northern monsters. Previously, Delia was sure that this was just a legend, but it was unlikely that the Duke would lie. She asks for a direct answer as to how safe it is to be inside the castle. There is no clear answer to this question. It all depends on the experience of the guards. To calm her down a little, Dator promises to protect the bride from any monster. And yet, sometimes ordinary experience is not enough to cope with these creatures. Laces begins to realize that all the disgusting rumors turned out to be true. He asks to tell us a little more about what rumors we are talking about. It looks like he's hinting at something indecent, but it's better not to play with fire. Having apologized for his stupidity, the Duke only adds that they look great together. Without explaining anything, he suggests going to the dining room where the table is already set. At that moment, Leah realizes that the company is heading in her direction. Turning around, she sees a huge table behind her, clearly intended for guests. You can't just run out of the dining room, you need to find a suitable shelter immediately. If she is noticed, a simple visit will turn into a complete failure of the plan. Meanwhile, Dater politely refuses the help offered by the Duke. From the conversations, it becomes clear that the destination of their journey was the castle of another family. The carriage broke down not far from here, so they asked for a visit themselves. The Duke simply wanted to feed the guests, not knowing who he would meet in the dining room. Still not understanding what was going on, he decides to change the original plan a little. This maid was not here by chance, although she still has to explain herself. Laces offers to show the guest room while the maids fully prepare the dining room. Guests can calmly change their clothes after the journey, and they will meet again later. He asks them not to refuse, understanding that their upbringing obliges them to be modest. Having received orders, the maids begin to carry things into the guests' rooms. This haste is a little suspicious, although Delia tries hard to appear friendly. Laces responds with the same smile, showing genuine concern for the castle's guests. But the main thing the Duke would like is to have a little talk with his personal maid. She has a couple of questions to answer before returning to her usual routine. The housekeeper was supposed to convey that Leah was not allowed to leave the room. She never listens, even when she hears a direct order from her master. Meanwhile, Delia begins to regret agreeing to go on the trip. The damn carriage broke down right in the middle of nowhere, and there was champagne waiting for them at the resort. However, when there is a beloved man nearby, everything else seems like a trifle. She admits that she is ready to follow him to the ends of the earth if necessary. Perhaps any man would be happy to hear something like this addressed to him. Perhaps it is on this journey that Dater will finally decide to propose. However, something begins to happen before his eyes that slightly spoils the picture. The Duke is acting very strangely, although he looked healthy a couple of minutes ago. It feels like he's hastily hiding some woman in the dining room. And not just any woman, but a personal maid, if you believe her uniform. She must be very attractive to be able to seduce Laces. Her face seems too familiar. They must have met in another estate. Not believing his own eyes, Dater recognizes the maid as his ex-fiancée. At the same time, the Duke continues the conversation, not even suspecting that he is being followed. He is confident that the guests are in their room and will only be ready for dinner later. Leah asks to tell the story about the broken carriage in which the guests were traveling. It is impossible to foresee an accident and the arrival of guests who did not plan to be here. However, Laces warned in advance that a family of guardians would arrive soon. Leah promises to answer all questions after she finds out the truth. Moreover, it was no coincidence that he tried to hide her, knowing who Dater was to her. Every time Leah acts willfully, the Duke completely stops understanding her. He already said that he was doing everything for her well-being and gave no reason for doubt. At this point, the butler asks for forgiveness, but he is forced to interrupt the conversation. There is an urgent message that the Duke must know about first. Ronan suggests taking the maid away from here until things calm down. The Duke orders that she be kept under close watch, otherwise she will do something stupid again. It seems that now he is going to openly follow her, without hiding behind simple concern. It was no coincidence that the butler showed up at that very moment, promising to tell the news. He did not want to do this in the presence of the maid, fearing unnecessary publicity. However, they had known Ronan for quite a long time, so she shouldn't be afraid. The knight had seen them quarrel many times before, although the Duke treated Leah well. In response, she demands that they not talk about it in such a tone, as if there is something more uniting them. She respects this knight, but there are things that even good friends should not do. Besides, Ronan won't be able to deny that he has been devoted to the Duke his entire life. If he asks for a favor, he will fulfill any request without hesitation. Understanding her hint, Ronan only asks her to behave quietly, without arousing suspicion. Leah should know that the knight got a month's leave for helping her a little. In other words, the Duke values her so much that he is ready to reward even trifles. It's worth thinking about this before suspecting Laces of anything bad. Meanwhile, Delia was delighted with the local cuisine, expecting much less. She had no idea that even living in the north, one could eat delicious food. Dator is a little surprised that the Duke is discussing the menu with his maid. That maid with silver hair was in this dining room recently. Dator noticed this by chance from afar as he walked down the corridor to his room. Laces assures that the girl is an ordinary maid, and this is not what the Count is hinting at. However, she reminds Datora of someone, as if they had met in the past. To be more precise, this maid looks a lot like the ex-bride who committed suicide. The Duke is a little surprised that he still remembers his beloved. He truly loved Leah, and it was quite difficult to accept such a bitter loss. But due to a sudden illness they separated, this happened shortly before her death. And Dator considers the information surrounding her name to be nothing more than gossip. He is a little surprised that the Duke could not find time to come to the funeral. Ultimately, all families of guardians are obliged to see each other off on their final journey. Coming from his lips, these words sound like accusations, although the Duke controls himself. He asks the guest not to forget about his conscience when he remembers the late bride. In addition, there is a future wife nearby who may be uncomfortable. All this time, Delia had been listening to the conversation in silence, but the Duke's remark was indeed fair. Laces didn't mean to offend anyone, but sometimes it's worth reminding people of something. If we talk about his relationship with the deceased, it was quite ordinary. Most likely, Leah considered him a complete stranger. Perhaps she would have done the same if the Duke himself had been buried that day. It's hard to imagine this girl coming to his funeral, dropping everything. However, for Laces himself, she was the meaning of his whole life, something only he knows. That's why he so desperately wants to keep her in the castle, protecting her from the slightest problem. Sometimes it seems that the Duke is ready to do anything just to have Leah by his side. Finally, Delia demands that this talk about the late Mrs. Leah stop. She has already died and nothing in this world can bring her back to Earth. The girl is absolutely right, but Dator asks not to speak about it so loudly. And you have to choose your words carefully, because they are talking about his ex-fiancée. Leah was once very dear to his heart. At least that should be respected. Delia will never be able to understand what she meant to the Count's life. Dator speaks about this quite sincerely, but the bride may not like it. It was as if she had forgotten that Leah had once been her best friend. Delia had been holding back her anger for a long time, but this phrase finally got her angry. She asked many times to stop remembering the one Dator used to love. And yet, this is not the first time he has seen her in such a state, unusual for an aristocrat. The maids probably heard their quarrel and will now tell the master about it. This becomes another reason to think about whether it is worth marrying such a girl. If she allows herself to behave like this now, what will happen during family life? Leah never did that, even when the relationship was at a dead end. Dator suddenly remembers that the Duke never answered a single question. He decides to personally figure out who this maid really is. Meanwhile, Leah does exactly as the Duke ordered. She does not leave the room so as not to arouse his anger again. Returning to the room, Selly reports that the cleaning of the entire house is completely finished. Everything went much faster, considering that a crowd of guests were expected to arrive first. It is said that the Duke had an argument with his guest during a regular dinner. Lord Ronan was at the door and personally heard the entire conversation between the two guardians. Leah admits that before dinner the Duke assigned round-the-clock security. Now the personal maid is being watched, as if Laces fears for her life. Leah did not want such a fate for herself, but such was the Duke's order. If she had been an ordinary maid, not standing out from the crowd, there would have been no problems. But at some point, the master for some reason paid attention to her and made her his personal maid. Selly doesn't know for sure, but he seems to have guessed her identity. Leah herself said that the Duke did not trust her words about her simple origins. She asks not to jump to conclusions, because Laces would have said so directly. From her friend's memories, she understands that the reason is definitely not her. The fact that he invited Pesor as his personal physician is explained by a long-standing friendship. He knows that Leah worked in the Nereal's house together with the young doctor. However, the fact that he hid it from Dator gives rise to some concerns. If the Duke had not known that Leah was the heir, he would not have done this. Obviously, from the very beginning, he was well aware of who he was hiring as a servant. The only strange thing is that Laces still pretends that she is a simple worker. Sometimes it begins to seem that he knows all the reasons for past deaths. Suddenly, An unusual guess comes to mind that answers all the questions. It's hard to believe it's true, but all the events boil down to one thing. Like Leah, Laces may be trapped in a curse with a series of repeated deaths. Then it is clear how he knows about the deadly poison in the form of demeroxin. It's as if he's trying to destroy all the reasons that inevitably lead Leah to death. At this moment, voices are heard outside the door. Someone demands to be let into the room. Dator's voice begins to sound even louder after another refusal. Ronan had repeated many times that he was guarding this room on the Duke's orders. If a guest wishes to meet Leah, they should contact Laces directly. Not having received permission, the Count begins to call Leah by name, begging her to respond. Somehow he was able to guess that she was in this very room. If he breaks in right now, it will bury the original plan forever. It seems the Count is no longer listening to Ronan, preferring to pretend that he doesn't hear anything. He comes even closer to the door, but the knight has no right to use force against the guest. He is only obliged to warn that intrusion into the room will be considered a violation. Without regard for the rules, in a second, Dator does something that will provide answers to all questions. Now he can see for himself what such antics lead to. The maid was wearing only a nightgown and did not expect the guests to arrive at all. Sally apologizes for her appearance. She was just about to change for the evening shift. If the master allows, the maid would like to do this behind closed doors. Introducing herself as the Duke's maid, Leah, Sally once again asks for a little time. There are no other maids in this room, so there is no point in continuing the search. The problem was that the maid he was looking for had silver hair. Sally reminds that due to the darkness in the castle, the master could simply have confused the color. However, he is not so blind that he cannot distinguish red from silver. The entire hostel has been completely checked, only this room remains. Leah understands that he is serious about finding her and is not willing to accept refusal. The more his girlfriend tries to confuse him, the more persistently he seeks the truth. Dator was always too proud to simply give up on his idea. There is, however, an important detail that immediately reveals the deception in the maid's words. At first, Sally herself didn't think about it, but now it's too late. Even if the Duke respects his personal maid so much, it seems absurd. After all, there are 2 beds in her room, which means there is a second maid. Until this moment, she had not mentioned anything about her roommate. It is obvious that there is someone else hiding in the closet, and only by opening it can the truth be revealed. It seemed that only one step separated Dator from his cherished goal, which would happen right now. It is at this moment that other guests appear in the room. They are not as friendly as this nice young maid. It cannot be said that he was afraid of dogs, but these pets look like rabid animals. The Count orders the dog to be removed from here immediately, threatening an official complaint. According to Sally, these dogs are not yet fully trained and can behave unpredictably. The Northerners must be crazy to keep huge dogs in a room. Almost all the servants came running to the screams, asking the Count to leave the room. It's about his own safety, because dogs are really quite aggressive. They offer their help, although Dator is quite capable of handling it himself. You need to leave while the pets have calmed down a bit and stopped snapping. He is not used to leaving empty-handed, but this incident forces him to end the search. Ronan had long noticed that this gentleman was suffering from a mental disorder. Otherwise, it is impossible to explain the fact that he bursts into rooms without permission. It was lucky that at that moment Sally had not yet managed to start changing her clothes. On the way back, he finally realizes that he made a stupid mistake. The maid could not have been his ex-fiancé, who had long since passed away. At that moment, another maid with similar hair appears nearby. Her long hair reminds me of Leah just as much as it did this morning. Perhaps she is the maid whom the Duke scolded in the dining room. However, this is not so. The girl does not look like Leah at all, as soon as you turn around. Only now does Dator realize that in every servant he is looking for that very girl. He will easily go crazy if he continues to look for his ex-lover in every corner of the house. After he leaves, Ronan asks everyone to disperse, keeping what happened a secret. Now Leah can calmly leave the closet where she has been for so long. There is no doubt that without the help of young people, her fate would have turned out differently. Ronan asks not to bother explaining why the maid was hiding in the closet. It seems he also has an idea who this personal maid really is. However, the guests' sudden arrival cannot be considered a mere coincidence given their plans. According to Dator, they were just passing by the castle when the breakdown occurred. And yet, Laces knew in advance that their carriage would break down on that very day. It seemed that this incident had already happened many times, just like Dator's arrival at the castle. And all this happened at a time when Leah was supposed to die an absurd death. It would be great to just read their memories, but that's not possible now. Selly asks not to worry about the Count. Very soon the two will leave the castle. It must be said that Selly behaved very bravely, knowing what was in store for her. She seemed to be very frightened when she felt the wrath of this gentleman. Selly always tried to appear unperturbed, but there was a completely different side to her. Sometimes it is difficult to imagine what a person is capable of in the most difficult situation. At such moments, qualities that are sleeping somewhere deep inside awaken. Leah had already forgotten those simple, friendly feelings that money can't buy. She wants to continue this friendship, gradually learning much more about Selly. Meanwhile, Ronan advises them to go to bed if they don't want to miss the morning meeting. A lot has happened today. My friends still have time to discuss it. They don't notice that all this time there is another guest of the castle nearby. However, this is not important, because the Count had long been convinced of the absurdity of his idea. Now only she knows that Dator's former lover is still alive.